Hey guys, Woods Farm here. Just out in the shop working on the Scout car, and I thought I'd make another quick welding video on the Mastercraft 80 amp Flux-Core welder. I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks of just how to make this welder work just a little bit better. So stick around, check it out. Okay, so first things first, the controls. These aren't really that intuitive, and they can be a little confusing. Obviously, higher quality welders allow you to kind of fine-tune things a lot better. But what I found really is essentially I keep this welder on 2 settings almost all the time because I'm mostly working on thicker materials, kind of 1/8 thickness. So generally speaking, I keep the welder on max 1, but just to understand this, you have 4 heat settings. You have minimum 1, which would be the lowest level, and then you switch it over to minimum 2, and that's kind of the next level up, so that's like level 2. And then you switch it to the maximum setting, and then you go back to level 1, and that's kind of the third range. Just a little bit more heat, and this is one of the settings I tend to use. I almost always keep it on maximum, and then if you want to go to the highest heat setting, you're going to maximum 2, so that'd be number 4. So just over that again, we got setting number 1, setting number 2, setting number 3, and then 4 is your highest setting. And then of course you're just working with the wire speed after that. And I typically run the wire speed anywhere from like 5 to 8, depending on the thickness of the material that I'm welding and also the thickness of the wire. So the next thing we'll talk about is wire. So for my projects, I'm almost exclusively using the 3/0 wire, and this is kind of the medium wire that this welder is capable of accepting. It will take 2/3, it will take 3/0, and it will also take the thicker 3/5. I've done some experimenting with the 3/5, and I find it doesn't run well. You have to have it on the highest heat setting, and I just find that the 3/0 is a little more versatile, and I keep it spooled up, and I can do thinner materials and I can do thicker materials based on the wire speed. And that's kind of how I judge that. Again, keeping it on the highest settings. Now, if you were going to do body work with this and you wanted to weld stuff kind of thinner than 18 gauge, I would recommend going with the 2/3 wire and using those lower heat ranges. But if you're doing all-purpose stuff, I'd recommend going with the 3/0, and you are going to get a little bit better weld if you use kind of a higher quality wire. But once you get good, I've done some experimenting, and I use some cheaper stuff from Princess Auto. I've tried the Hobart, and it all seems to run about the same once you get good. When you're first learning, I recommend definitely going with something a bit better, and generally I like this Lincoln stuff. But really think of your wire thicknesses as matching up with your heat range. So the thicker the wire, you're going to want to run that on the hottest settings. If you're using a thinner wire, you're going to run it on the lower settings. Keep that in mind. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is the duty cycle. Now, essentially what that is how long you can run this machine in a continuous bead. Obviously, this isn't a commercial grade unit, so the duty cycle is a lot lower than what you would get on a more high quality machine. So essentially what that boils down to is how far you can go with a continuous bead before you need to stop and take a break. And that's going to differentiate a bit whether or not you're running off 15 or 20 amps. Now, I know I've got a lot of questions on this welder in the past videos I've made in regards to, can you run this on a 15 amp? Yes, you can. I've done a ton of welding off of 15 amps, but what you need to keep in mind is you got to be really cognizant of that duty cycle, especially when you're on the higher heat settings. If you're on max 1 or 2, you're only going to get 1 or 2 inches of welding before you break that breaker, and flip the breaker and lose power. If you go shorter welds, you can continue welding a lot longer, and you don't have to worry about flipping the breaker, tripping the breaker. So keep that in mind when you're welding with this machine. Okay, so just for good quality welding, one thing you want to keep in mind is support. You want to always have your hand braced and be in a really comfortable position so you can slowly and accurately move along your seam there where you're putting your bead down. And as for duty cycle, this thicker material, if I was running on 15 amps, I would probably only go an inch, maybe an inch and a half. So I would weld, and I would weld, and I would weld, and I would weld down, and then I would stop and just kind of let the machine cool down, let all the wires and everything cool down, and then you can continue again. And that duty cycle is just kind of the amount of time and how often you need to pause as you weld. Another thing that's going to help you is just how much wire you have running outside of that tip. Right now that's about half an inch, maybe a little more, and I would say that's just a little bit too much. But you definitely don't want to run it, with like a huge amount of wire out. You want to kind of be closer to the tip. There's a sweet spot, so as you practice, you'll get kind of the hang of that and figure out where you need to be. Okay, this is the first weld. This is on the highest heat setting, and my wire speed was 7 or 8. I had to start slow because there's a wide gap there and I had to kind of fill it. But as the gap got a little bit narrower as I came down, I was able to kind of pick up the pace. Okay, here's the second weld. This was on the third heat setting, wire speed about 6 or 7. So whether you should go upwards or downwards, that's up for debate, I guess. I'm not an expert, but I just do what I find works best for me. As you're learning, experiment with the kind of the angle that you're holding things, and that is also going to affect the bead and your puddle and how well the machine welds. Okay guys, we're going to wrap this video up here. Obviously take this information with a grain of salt. I'm no expert, like I said, self-taught, but I wanted to do a specific video on this welder, the Mastercraft 80 amp Flux-Core, because I have had a lot of questions about it. Hopefully this helped out, but I recommend checking out lots of welding tutorials on YouTube. There's lots of great information out there that's going to help you learn and get better at welding. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and as always, thanks for watching.